On July 6, 1861, Frederick Douglass, from an article titled, "Should the Negro Enlisted the Union Army," says, "Once let the black man get upon his person the brass letters U.S., let him get an eagle on his button and a musket on his shoulders and bullets in his pocket. There is no power on earth or under the earth which can deny that he has earned the right of citizenship in the United States." Now we will hear from volunteer reenactment William Hollowell, who works for the city of New Bern, David Theron, who works for Coastal Community Action on the history of the USCTs, and Bernard George, retired city planner, will be joining us as well. This dynamite of the 35th Regiment discussing some of the key items soldiers used in the Civil War, review uniform gear displayed as through key marching command, singing verses of 3 songs that motivate the USCTs, and finally talking about the 2 characters these gentlemen have chosen to honor. Go in, hit the like button, hit the share button. Let us know that you're out there and you want to hear these stories.
My name is William Hollowell Jr., and I'd like to first talk about the timeline and the history of the USCT. Everybody knows that the Emancipation Proclamation, and as we hear through history, freed the slaves. But there were other documents and other legislative acts done also along with the proclamation. One was the Confiscation Act of July 17, 1862, and the other one was the Militia Act of July 17, 1862. Along with these documents, along with the Emancipation Proclamation, it states that slaves that were in the occupied states will be free as of January 1st, 1863. And this is very important due to the simple fact that the slave states were kind of like almost directed by the Union Army to free their slaves, or this would be the start of the war. All right, the number of slaves that, or soldiers that were involved and served in the Army and Navy was 180 U.S. Army soldiers from slaves or freemen, and then there was another 20,000 that were in the U.S. Navy. 90,000 of those slaves joined the Army, and there were other freemen that also joined the Army from the North. The contraband, or as we called it, the slaves, they came from all areas of North Carolina. They came from 40 different counties, and a large majority came from Beaufort, or Beaufort, North Carolina, just down the way headed towards Carteret County. The engagements that the United States Colored Troop were involved in, there were 449 different engagements or battles that the USCT were involved in. 39 of those were major battles. The USCT, we did suffer some losses during these battles. 40,000 men died during these engagements. 30,000 died because of illnesses and sickness, and 10,000 actually died during battle engagements. One of the highlights of the Civil War for colored troops was the Butler Medal. The Butler Medal was commissioned by General Butler. He commissioned this medal for black troops because we didn't have any awards or anything for black troops at the time. So the Butler Medal was bought by General Butler and given to African American soldiers in their fight during the Civil War. Also very notable is General Weil. General Weil was commissioned by the State Department to come and to raise a black regiment down here in North Carolina. They were called General Wild's African Brigade, which was formerly the 1st North Carolina Colored Volunteers. Wild Brigade, he was commissioned or ordered to raise troops. He raised approximately 5,000 troops for this engagement. 1,200 troops came out of the New Bern area and that were formed. Butler's Wild Brigade, one of the things they were commissioned to do was to go into the interior and free more slaves and have them join the Union cause. And this was successfully done if you read your history and you learn about what happened in Warsaw, North Carolina. Now, everybody asks, well, why did the black soldier wanted to do this? What made this so substantial for the black soldiers and for their families and their communities? Well, out of this, amendments were written and were added to the Constitution that were not part of the Constitution. The 13th Amendment freed blacks from slavery. Slavery was abolished according to the 13th Amendment. The 14th Amendment gave blacks, African American soldiers, the right to be citizens of the United States. And the 15th Amendment was the right to vote. We wanted the right to vote and live as free men. Thank you. Dave.
Good morning. I'm going to give you just a little bit more about the 35th United States Colored Troops, some of the demographics regarding the formation of this particular group. As Private Hollowell said, when Brigadier General Edward A. Wild came to New Bern to recruit troops, there was already so many freed slaves, newly freed slaves that had escaped here because they had protection from the Union Army. So he had plenty to choose from. And in addition to the raids that Private Hollowell told you about to raid plantations to get recruits, he became very dependent on a man called Abraham Galloway, who was a fearless African-American leader, a Union supporter, and a very successful spy for the Union Army. And it was mainly because of his relentless efforts to convince these newly freed African Americans to join the Union Army that we were able to raise so many troops in this area. So he was probably the most instrumental person in making sure that enough troops were raised to reach the goals of the Union Army in this area. General Wild was very careful in how he selected his officers. He wanted them to be not only battle tested, but he also wanted them to be abolitionists, because he wanted the troops they were going to be commanding. He wanted them to be passionate about and treat them well. So the very first person he put in charge of the 35th was Colonel James Beecher, who was from the North, but just as significantly for your purposes, he was the brother of Harriet Beecher Stowe, which is probably more well known because she's the author of the famous anti-slavery book, Uncle Tom's Cabin. His second in command was a mulatto named Lieutenant Colonel William Reed, who had a lot of experience in battle because he was also a major in the German Imperial Army. There were two other significant black officers: Assistant Surgeon Major DeGrasse, who was the first man admitted to a state medical society and the only African-American doctor to serve in a Civil War regiment. And there was also Chaplain John Mars, a black man who was appointed to meet the spiritual needs of the white officers and the black enlisted men. So therefore, on July 24th, 1863, the 1st North Carolina Colored Volunteers officially mustered right here on these grounds at the Academy. Now, at that time, he was given a regimental flag by the New Bern Women's Relief Association. And I'm going to show you this flag and show you in flag, let you see what it looks like. Yeah. So this regimental flag, one like this, was presented to Brigadier General Wild, and he was able to officially muster in the unit for New Bern. Now let me give you a few demographics about this group. Besides mostly coming from Eastern North Carolina, as Private Hollowell told you, most of the black recruits were from plantations and were slaves, so they were 90% of them were illiterate. Farmers and laborers made up almost 90% of the regiment. Some were trained as carpenters, masons, blacksmiths, and shoemakers. But the records also showed that some were also listed as sailors, teamsters, butlers, cooks, butchers, distillers, painters, caulkers, and waiters. And first, some more demographics from this regiment that was kind of interesting was 92% of those recorded were categorized as dark, brown, or black. Only 7% were described as having light complexion. However, of the non-commissioned officers, 66% were listed as either light or fair-skinned, which stands to reason because they were chosen based on their skin tone and because of their skill set, which I will go into when I go into my character a little bit more. So that gives you just a few demographics about how the 35th was set up originally, according to the records that were written. And so at this point in time, I'm going to come over to the display table and show you some of the items that the troops used in camp.
Hey. Oh. Ready?
Every unit had a drummer. Often they were children, no more than 9, 10, 11 years old. So our drummer represents that. As you can see, as he was a star in one of Tryon Palace's magazines, he's about 9 years old, and he plays this drum for our unit. He uses these drumsticks, this drum, which is almost as big as he is. But it was very important because this drummer was in charge of making sure the cadence was kept by the unit. And when you have 1,000 men marching, that's hard to do. So it was a very important piece of the unit. We usually marched about 25 miles a day. So we had to carry these knapsacks when we marched. And they're fairly heavy, but you got used to it, about almost 50 pounds. But it was it had everything in it we needed to not have to come back or get resupplied anytime soon. Of course, when we're in our encampment, we had coffee pots, and we drank out of these coffee cups. And we carried our own coffee, beans to be able to make coffee out of. We had lanterns, of course, so we could see inside the tents at night. And I'm just going to show you a few examples of some of the food that we used, that we carried in our haversacks, which we'll go over in a minute. We had flour. We had dry peas, rice, some dry beans, and some salt pork. I intentionally left this for last because this is called hardtack. And this was some of the primary food that we had to eat when we couldn't have a lot of these other items I pointed out. Hardtack is very, very hard, made out of mostly flour, salt, and water. And it didn't taste very good, but it was nutritious enough to get you by until you can get some real food. And it was, almost every unit in the Civil War was dependent on this hardtack. In order to entertain ourselves, we had playing cards, which is a lot like the deck of cards that you see today. These here are from 1863. This is an example of a salt and pepper shaker. We ate out of these utensils, and we had to be thrifty, so we were able to, have the spoon, the knife, the fork, all in one particular unit. Well, I won't pull the knife out, but it's in there. And these plates are what we ate on. And we would drink out of these cups. We are professional soldiers, so we were paid, we did have money. The white soldiers got about $13 a month, but we received about $10 a month. And this is what it looked like. And $3 of this had to go to clothing allowance. So in actuality, we were only taking home about $7 a month. We carried this rifle with us. This is an 1861 Springfield. The goal, it cost about $15 to $20 a month. So as you can see, it costs more than a month's salary just to own one of these. And in addition to that, these rifles, this was the most primary used rifle in the Civil War. They made about 1.5 million of these. The goal in battle was to fire 3 rounds per minute. If you're going to be, give yourself the best chance of staying alive. They had about a 500-mile range. I'm sorry, not 500 mile, 500-foot range. And they fired bullets that looked like this. This was a bullet that was actually found on the battlefield. So that gives you an example of a few things that they carried in camp. Now, Private Hollowell is going to now talk about the uniform, the parts of the uniform we wore, and point out some of the key items of those.
Thank you, David. Well, like you said, being a soldier, you always wanted to look good, even going into battle. Some of the things that we have on the display table, I'm going to just start with the haversack. The haversack was carried by soldiers during their march and when they're going to and from different locations. The haversack carried your plate, it carried your canteen, and it carried your spoon and fork and what other provisions you could fit in there. Also, along with the haversack, you had a water canteen, and you carried this along with you during your march. You want to make sure that it's full. You had plenty of fresh water so you wouldn't get dehydrated. Also on our table, and what we also carried, this is called a cartridge pouch. And this is where you would put your cartridges in and fill up as you need it. Also carried was your bayonet for your infield rifle. Your bayonet was also used for close quarter battle. It's a very intimidating weapon. Okay. Also carried, and as Ms. Bryan mentioned, you wanted your eagle. This was your badge that you were part of the Union Army. This pouch was also used to carry your ammo and your cartridges in also. And you see the U.S. logo prominently displayed. All right, let's move on. Okay, there's various types of coats and hats that were worn. In the wintertime, standing guard duty, when you got cold, and if you had enough money and made enough money, you were able to purchase what is called a greatcoat. The greatcoat, you know, kept you warm, and it's nice in appearance, looks very classy. But when you went into battle, you had to have a shorter coat. You had to have a coat that you'd be able to maneuver in. As the coat I have on is a frock coat, and this type of coat was mainly for formal appearances or events. But in the frock coat, as you can see, the length is shorter. And that's so you're able to go into battle and you're able to maneuver better with this on than with the greatcoat or the frock coat. Also noted, if we could pan over to Sergeant David Theron, he is a non-commissioned officer. Non-commissioned officers, they wore a red slash that you see him wearing on his uniform. There were two other types of slashes worn also. A green slash is worn by people of the medical profession, commissioned officers that were in the medical field. As he talked about Dr. DeGrasse, he wore a green slash. Officers, and especially infantry officers, they wore a burgundy or maroon slash, which was a darker color to make the distinctions between officers and non-commissioned officers. Okay. Oh yes, David is wearing his Butler Medal, and that is the medal that was commissioned by General Butler to be awarded to black troops during the Civil War period. It's also known as the Medal of the James. All right, let's move on to our different types of hats. There's three types of hats that were used during the Civil War. The first is called a forged hat. As you can see, it is elongated at the top and it usually just flops over. That's one type of cover that was worn. Another type of cap is called a kepi. A kepi, as you can see, was a shorter type of hat, and also each hat could be configured and show the 35th, which is the regiment you belong to. The bugle signifies that you were in the infantry, and then the letter A of the alphabet tells you what company you were assigned to. Okay, also worn. Underneath our coats, you had a set of suspenders. And this was to keep your breeches up because you really didn't have a belt to or belt loop to support your pants. So you had a set of suspenders. Also worn, and mainly for formal occasions, you have a bow tie. And then also you had a set of gloves, white gloves, for formal occasions. And all this was prominently worn with a white collared shirt. The shirt only buttoned down to 3 buttons. Easy access, get in and out of. And that's the display for the uniforms worn by the 35th USCT or any Civil War period reenactor. David?
Okay, at this time, we're going to show you a little bit of a few of the commands that were used while they were in camp, because you had to do a lot of practicing, a lot of downtime sometimes, and so you want to do some practicing on some marching commands and some commands that you would do while you're in formation. I'm going to call out some of the commands, and Private Hollowell is going to execute the commands. Attention! What he's displaying now is what's called order arms. And so that's what you want to start out in when you're in formation. Shoulder arms. All commands originate from this position here, because you want to already be in a position where you can maneuver the rifle easier. Present arms. This was used when you're trying to salute the flag. And while he's holding the gun, usually the person who doesn't have a gun will salute like this. Always the palm is out. That looks unfamiliar to what they do in the military now, but back then, this is how they saluted. Shoulder arms. Order arms. Parade rest. Attention. Shoulder arms. Left face. Right face. Right shoulder shift. This was to make it easier to carry if you got tired of using the shoulder arms while you're marching. It made it just another way to make it easier to march. Shoulder arms. Order arms. Dismissed. That just gives you a few of the commands that we used in the field to let you know. Just a few small things. There's a whole lot more that went on, but that's just a few of the basic things that we used in some of our commands that we used in camp or on marches. Okay, at this time, we'll go ahead and put the rifle back, and then we're going to, in order to keep ourselves motivated, both on marches and in camp, we sung some songs. And we're going to get some help here on these songs. 2 more people, if they'll come up. What we're going to sing is we're going to sing just the first verse of 3 songs. Amazing Grace, O Freedom, and then Battle Hymn of the Republic. And each song had its own meaning behind singing it. And so we just want to give you just a flavor of a few of those songs, the first verse, to let you know how they... we'll just go ahead and do it. Come on, let's
okay.
Go ahead and do it. We'll start with "Oh Freedom." "Oh Freedom" was a very important song to us because it reminded us of why we're fighting in this to begin with. Okay, so here's the first verse of how it went. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom. Oh, freedom over me. over me. And before I be a slave, I'll be buried in my grave and go home to my Lord and be free. So you can see the significance of a song like that to remind us of why we're fighting for our freedoms. Is the reason why we're doing this to begin with. Okay, then we need some spiritual relief at times. And so oftentimes they would sing Amazing Grace. And it went something like this. Amazing grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Was blind, but now I see. And so that was some of our spiritual relief of the song. Now we're going to talk about the Battle Hymn of the Republic, which is sung often while we marched. And we're just going to sing the first verse of that particular song to let you know about how that went. Okay?
Mine eyes have seen the glory of the coming of the Lord. He has planted out the vintage where the grapes of wrath were stored. He has
as he has loosed the faithful lightning of his terrible swift sword. His truth is marching on.
Sing.
Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. Glory, glory, hallelujah. His truth is marching on. So that gives you an example about 3 songs that we've sung in camp and also on marches. And so at this time, we're going to talk a little bit about our characters that we portray during our reenactments. And since this is well, go ahead and introduce yourself.
I'm Major DeGrasse, and I am the first African American to be admitted to a state medical society. 1859. I was in New York. And there, after finishing medical school and practicing with one of the greatest surgeons in the world, French surgeon. You know, my grandfather was a French count, and I was able to receive some of the best education that the medical world had to offer. I later moved back to Massachusetts and then to New York, where as the war broke out, I felt it was my duty to join the Union Army and strike a blow for freedom to help my fellow men, African American men, blacks who rushed to join the service. They needed medical attention. So I was one of only 8 surgeons in the United States Army to be African American. And I was the only one to be assigned to a field unit. I was assigned to the 35th United States Colored Troop. Came here to New Bern in 1863. In May of 1863. Almost to this day. And there I operated as a regimental surgeon for the 35th. I went on to travel with the unit to South Carolina and later to Florida, where We were engaged in the Battle of Ulustee, and the 35th performed admirably as the first unit formed in North Carolina and one of the first African American units formed in the South, composed of freedmen, ex-slaves. We performed there, and of course, in 1863, there was a lot of problems with my being a black surgeon. Although I was light-skinned, my grandfather was white, I suffered a lot of discrimination. I could have probably passed for white, like the second in command of this unit did. But no, I will not deny my African blood. Because of my stance, and because I was black, I had African blood in me, false charges were leveled against me. And eventually, after the Battle of Ulustee, where I worked about 48 hours without sleep, I was charged with drunkenness on duty, which was inconceivable. And finally, they drummed me out along with the other African American officers who had enlisted early on in the military. Now, I'm going to pass this on to one of my soldiers, and you can continue with your character, or with the character of others. Thank you.
I'm going to tell you a little bit about a man that came from Beaufort, North Carolina, where, as I earlier told you, where a vast majority of the people from Eastern North Carolina soldiers came from. Now, John Gaskell was born in 1809, and he actually served he served the duration of the war once he mustered in, and he had the distinction of being the oldest enlisted member of the unit. He was 57 years old when he joined. If you can imagine serving in battle at that kind of age. I'm honored to point that out, because we had people from 18 years old all the way up to, or 12 years old if you include the drummer, all the way up to 57 years old, as I pointed out. So that's just a little bit about the gentleman that I was talking about. And I also wanted to point out one of the reasons why you see this red sash. It took a particular skill set to do that. So you had to have skills that a lot of times were obtained when you were on the plantation if you worked in the house versus being in the field. You got skills in reading and writing and know how to take inventory. So a lot of times they were the first ones promoted to sergeant. And so I'll just let Mr. Private Hollowell tell you just a little bit more about his character.
Well, my character is pretty unusual circumstances. I enlisted in May 22nd, 1863, in the 35th United States Colored Troop. I was assigned to Company K. And my story is that of John H. Davis. I was free, then I became a slave. And then when the Union came back, I joined the Union, went across Union lines and rejoined the Union. I also went to the Battle of Ulustee down in Florida, and during that battle, I was captured. And I was sent to the Andersonville prison camp in Georgia. While at the prison camp, I was able to survive. And after the war, I was then re-mustered in, and I was able to leave Andersonville with my life. After that, I re-mustered in down in South Carolina, where I was mustered out of service in 1866. That's my story.
It's been a pleasure today to briefly tell you a little bit about the 35th United States Colored Troops. And We hope to do more in this series as the summer goes on, but this gives you a nice introduction as to some parts and what the 35th United States Colored Troops did during the Civil War after they were mustered in 1863 to about 1865. We'd love for you to leave some questions down below at the bottom in the comment section, and we will get them answered, rest assured. If somebody wants to join our unit, all they have to do is contact Sharon Bryant at Tryon Palace. She is our African American coordinator, and she will get you the proper application to fill out. And you can come to see one of our meetings, and you can decide for yourself whether you'd like to join this group. Thank you again for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking with you this morning.